Okay, great. Paul, thank you very much. You may also have noticed is, and Paul didn't mention that, is we have these almost different personas that we feel that we need to talk to and in a way speak their language. So last week was for the data managers. So for example, if you're busy building a data management practice within your organization, if you're in charge of that, then how would you go about justifying it to the business in terms of what are the benefits and what is important? And today it's what we refer to as the data citizen. So it's not your professional, it's not your manager, but it's almost the person that's working with data and adhering to all the rules that have been defined by the data management department or the EIM, Enterprise Information Management. So it's for those people and saying, well, how does a community of practice help you? And the idea is, the question that we want to go through is to make sure that either you would set one up in an informal way if there are things that you need to learn, or to join one that's already been set up. I'm also talking to, and we'll go through this now, the area that I'm focusing on is within the organization, all right? We will be having, almost in the next one that we talk to with the professionals, we'll be talking about what about getting into the provincial data management community, the country, the region, and DMI. So that's typically where where a lot of us sit. Certainly Mark and Eckhart and those people, we are known as data management professionals, and we find it very valuable to communicate and to operate within that community. Okay, so the context here is within the organization, it's for the data citizen, and how does a community of practice benefit you? All right. So I will always try to keep that alive. Now, I'm sure you may have seen this last week. We spoke of the socialization plan, and that's certainly, this was the screen from David Marco. I don't know if you guys got that article from him. And we certainly have suggested that a really nice addition to the socialization plan is the community of practice. And interestingly enough, I shared that with him on LinkedIn, and he said, yes, that's something that is missing. And he then spoke of different communities of practice within government and other type of organizations. So it was helpful to get that confirmation from Mark that I wasn't just bringing stuff in for no reason. And he saw lots of value within the community of practice. Okay, so last week, as you can see, we spoke about the benefits, the takeaways, the data management, how do you measure the maturity, and a little bit about Data South Africa. And this week, I want to focus more on what is the value and what is the target of a community of practice. So what I like to do, and certainly for those people that write articles, there's actually a really nice way of interacting with Google, and just to put it out there, and they start to give you some of the important points around a community of practice. So what is the meaning? What are the definitions? Typically the same thing. What's the theory? How does it relate to knowledge management? And how can this be used in education? Okay, so I thought that was quite helpful to start with. And so just a definition again, it's a system of collective critical inquiry and reflection focused on building a shared identity and collective intelligence garnered over time. So I'm not sure about you guys, but I certainly know all of the organizations that I work with, we are very bad at the knowledge management side. So we've got some real good specialists and things like that, but is any of that tacit knowledge that's sitting within our experts and our professionals, has it been documented anywhere? Have we created procedures and started to bring this out and get them sharing of that knowledge? Okay, now it is similar to that of when we go about data governance and we have to define policies, procedures, processes, technology. People refer to it as the P3T. it's a similar approach, but that's almost from a data governance point of view, trying to put the rules down so that they can do oversight and assurance. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, especially as developers, the last thing you want is to someone to come and check your homework or check your data model, and they've never told you how they're going to check it, how they're going to score it, and then they come and say, there's all sorts of problems, and it leads to a very, I just want to say, a very emotional engagement where it's either led by a professional that's been doing it for a long time, or it's subjective, and you're never too sure whether you're going to pass or fail within that. So this is where I like bringing out the community of practice and getting them involved. So just some quick definitions. Sharing a passion. I'm not going to read it all. We'll provide you with all the slides. Tap and share the tacit knowledge. So how do we get this tacit knowledge out? And there's a nice word for today: fructify knowledge and link to the networks of practice. Anyone know about fructify? Anyone want to have a guess on that?
Never heard of it.
It's actually a tax. It's a tax thing that in South Africa we use it in the tax law, and it's to bear fruit. So it's typically when you're registering revenue and expenses, it's around that's bringing revenue, and the expenses are restricted to what's bringing revenue. So it's what's bearing fruit within the organization, not anything. And you can claim your appropriate VAT from that. But the important part here is to extract the fruit and create something productive. So what is the community of practice building? And then interestingly enough, someone even suggested that it's impact your individual health and well-being. So I'm not convinced of that one, but I suppose anything that helps us do our work better, helps us improve the work that we're doing, and doesn't create that stress, there's got to be some health to that, some benefit that we see. All right, so learning is everything. Just some time back, and certainly I don't know how you guys operate, but the only way I enjoy what I'm doing and can survive is when it becomes interesting to me and when I get actively involved and get something out of it. And I remember I was working with IBM, and I was sent over from South Africa to Raleigh in North Carolina, and I got the wrong. When I arrived there, I realized I was there writing the wrong red book. So I thought I was going to go and write a red book on ABC, and in the end, they gave it to me that I have to manage the statistics of a LAN adapter. That was the old token ring LAN adapter.
Oh yeah.
And I must admit, for the first 2 weeks, I really battled. This was an 8-week engagement, and so I had to almost work on my own approach to it and say, what can I learn from it? What can I benefit? So almost from that time onwards, I felt that whenever I go into any engagement, whenever I do anything, learning is important to me. And try to develop this thing where learning is everything, and even work is learning. Okay, so if we look at a community of practice, some of the definitions, we can look at different areas of learning. One is the meaning, experiencing our life, our work as meaningful. The practice is sustainable mutual engagement in action. So how do we put a community of practice together to get this mutual engagement, mutual enjoyment of what we're doing, and some help in getting through that? Now, one of the things that I've noticed lately, and I'll actually share this case study with you, is working with data scientists, and a lot of times I work with econometricians and statisticians, and the data that they get a lot of the times is in a mess. So going through a process of developing a small community that would help us design a recipe to transform this data. And all of you guys know about that idea of data scientists spending 80% of the time wrangling and munging the data. and then 20% of the time doing the analytics. So what we've decided to do, and I'll show you the case study, is we put together a team that would help us work on this process. And it's amazing that is when you work together, when you understand the ways in which the statisticians do it, the way in which R does it, the way in which Python does it, then all of a sudden from a data modeling point of view, you start to realize that there's a lot more value that you can add to these people. And basically a data warehouse or a data mart developed in a unified star schema doesn't help. And it's that realization when we sit together and say, shucks, guys, if you just give me a fact table with all these integers in it, I can't do any goal seeking, I can't do any time series analysis on that data. And a lot of the times they don't interact with it, something like Power BI or Tableau or Click. They want to work with R or Python or whatever it is. And so they have quite a different way of approaching it. So setting up that community of practice with the participation, and there is an interesting point where that participation starts to be develop the recognition of competence. Okay, so when we're working with these communities of practice, and also within our organization, you know how we got that knowledge, skills, and competences. How do we measure competence within the organization? What is your level of competence? Are you a senior DBA just because you've been there for many years, or are you a senior DBA that can contribute practices and definitions and things like that? Okay, and the last element that we talk about is the identity, and that learning changes who we are. So as you progress with your learning curve, you'll notice a change in your own makeup and the way in which you position yourself. So some of the benefits, and I really like this way of one of the ladies put this together in terms of the community, is navigating the tensions, the creative tensions that we have and negotiating those. So you can see here that within the community of practice, we're talking about negotiating meaning. So understanding what these concepts are, what do they mean to us, how do we use them, negotiating practice. So how do we tackle them? And I'll give you some examples of that. And then negotiating expertise. So what does it mean to be an expert? How do you contribute in terms of brown bag sessions within the department? Within the organization, how do we share information? How do you become recognized as an expert? And then, of course, there's also identity and leadership that we get involved with. So this was quite helpful in terms of establishing and working in a community of practice where you've got these different dimensions from being really informal. And I think that's sort of the right place to start. And when you're starting, you're sort of just sharing stories. So you can see this in this area one, is we start by just sharing stories, sharing what we're battling with, what we're doing, sharing information, sharing tips, some document sharing. Oh, I've got this Excel spreadsheet that does that. And you can see how we sort of progress all the way down to this level 5, where we talk about external benchmarking or training and workshops, models of practice. So you can see how with the formality of the community of practice, all of a sudden we're getting to what data management and data governance require, is that people are contributing to our P3T, right? So it's one thing that we just go and set up all these practices, but is any expert that's in the different departments, are they contributing to it? Are they making it better? And if they're not making it better, then we've lost a lot of the social part of these practices. We've just defined here the rules, and we've sort of gone back to that whole thing of command and control. You will do it like this, and we get very little feedback. Okay, so there's some interesting steps there in terms of transitioning your practice from informal to formal, and then producing assets. So there's always this debate of, is a community practice part of the organizational structure, or is it part of just a group of people that are passionate? And what I'm finding is that it starts off with passion, and you want it to end up in terms of part of the organizational structure, so that you know that you can bring your data governance practices or your metadata or data modeling, you can bring them in there and they will start to look after those practices. They will start to help you develop those. Okay, so what's so important about these communities of practice? And this is something that you've seen in that socialization plan, is that we mustn't just see the community of practice of putting forward a new structure within the organization. We want to bring about the emphasis that every practice is dependent on social processes. Okay, so I wanted to just pause there and just get some feedback in terms of, and that's certainly something that I've been learning over the last 2-3 years. I can write as many controls and policies as I like. Sometimes a lot of them are just papers and documents that sit there, but it really helps when I get my data citizens using it, arguing about the processes, talking about the processes, and telling me that this process doesn't work and there's a better way to do it. Anyone can share any experiences on that in terms of, especially the people involved with trying to set these up. For example, a center of excellence. You know, they're typically there to set up your standards and your processes. But what we find with Center of Excellence is that they would almost dedicate a person to your project, and then that person does it from the Center of Excellence. Whereas this is about getting the people, especially if you federated, getting the people in the departments to do it the way in which you want it. Is there anyone, Paul, I don't know, anyone who would like to share about how they've added the social part to the processes, and have they seen value in doing that? Nobody? Mark, anything from your side?
Yeah, I was waiting for your more honored local guests to comment. I don't want to. I worked for the French oil company Total, and they had very formal data management practice for exploration and production. And we were able to get locally here in Calgary to get known as sort of the data guys and gals. And we actually had people trying to join the department. And of course, we couldn't have everybody transfer from what they were doing to our department. So we were able to do a bit of a community of practice. But I was only able to do that because I was the team lead. I was the manager. I struggle now. I'm a contractor. I'm brought in to do specific projects, even though I'd really love to do this kind of work within my client, because they really desperately need it. You know, my current client, they've got 2 analytics teams and they don't talk to each other. And so they're both issuing requests into the IT group. I need access to this, I need access to that, but there is no CDO, and never mind chief data officer, there's no chief data office.
Right.
So there's no coordination, and it's I see it and I hear it, and I can't do anything about it right now. So hopefully the economy improves and they want to get better. It can be done though. You can start a groundswell kind of movement in your organization.
All right. Paul Grubler, any comments from yourself?
How's it, Howard?
Hi, man.
I mean, in our case, I think we've been trying to, within Ultron, just actually trying to rally around those communities that exist, like the demo ones.
Right.
I know ST has done something a little bit more local with a group of not civil engineers, industrial engineers in Ultron, and they got together, and I think they still do fairly regularly. But it's such an important thing to do, and I think one danger is to have too many options to go for. So I've actually often thought about, and we actually do in Ultron. We have an analytics forum where the different units come together and we meet but it's not always coordinated well, and it's a bit of a chat going and so forth, and we share experiences and knowledge. But I think what is often required, at least in our case, is a more considered effort into that which is already there. And I mean, we like to, to come more to the demo meetings or these kind of things more.
Right.
So yeah, I think from our perspective, that's the sort of intention.
Yeah, I mean, and so that it sort of lines up with what I've experienced within the different organizations. It's quite hard to get them together. But what I have found, and this is where I wanted to share with you guys, is that this one thing of helping the data scientists with their data wrangling, because it's you see it, they're battling all over the place. So there was a nice term that people started to introduce in terms of, it was a proof of concept, now it's become a proof of value. I don't know if you guys have heard this new term that's coming around. So now we no longer do proof of concepts because they may not produce any value. Let's look at the value side. So this is the experience I've got, where I can go from a very informal thing to very formal. And so I see, for example, my case clinics, or the previous page was a case clinic. I call it a proof of value. And then we've got learning projects, and then we've got a model of practice. So as you can start seeing, and then we've got training and workshops. So I'll be talking about these first three now and giving you some ideas of what we've done. Okay. All right. So if I go to the first one, this was the one that you've spoken about, and I've referred to it as data modeling for analysis. And I've had to be very careful here, because when I talk to a statistician or an AI person or an econometrician and I talk about data modeling, they almost think about that as the data model that's going to make the decisions and help with the correlations and causation. So you already find yourself in missing each other, and one has to go through that quite a bit. And we internally refer to this thing as doing the dirty jobs. So how can we get rid of the dirty jobs, and how can we deal with these issues? Is 80% of our time is wasted on wrangling the data into the appropriate format to support the required analysis. And when I talk to the statisticians, and self-service analytics came along here, and they said, "Oh no, we'll help you. We'll make it so easy for you to put the data together. We'll give you these WYSIWYG data transformations, and you guys can manage all your data," which is great. They are certainly helpful, but the understanding on what is the right format and what works is what our typical data citizen is not aware of. They're not sure of that. And then what I'm finding is that when they put these things together, a lot of the times it's the data quality, introducing data quality issues there. So if any of you guys have been part of a self-service analytical team and they get data to link together, and it's fine when they come off a cube and they got all the data links, that's fantastic, but beware the day that they've got to link to an external Excel spreadsheet or something like that, and they're not always too sure how to do the joins. Okay. We then pick up the join problems, and when they join incorrectly, like the many-to-many or the one-to-many or whatever it is, and they get the wrong levels, then all of a sudden the numbers duplicate, and they don't really recognize it when they're going through the steps of bringing this data together. Okay. So what was interesting when we looked at this scenario in a few of the departments that were battling with it, we came up with this following thing of there's good news and bad news. And if I start with the bad news, is this problem's not going to go away. All right, the data scientists will be doing this data wrangling basically forever. I don't believe that the BI departments are going to be up to date with every single data set that is needed within the organization to answer and gain insights. So this thing's not going to go away. So if we don't help and help and educate and get the data citizens working on this, we're going to be living with this challenge forever. Now, getting a statistician or whoever they are to spend 80% of the time playing with data, that's not very effective. So, but the good news is that there are recipes and techniques. And I believe it's the community of practice that can help people deal with these issues. And so we can go and create about the proof of value, and then work with the experts in terms of when they teach a person how to get the right format. That's when we convert the experts' tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. They will start to have to document the way in which they do it. So where most of the professionals are very aware of a star schema, you may not be aware of the unified star schema that's come out. I don't know how many of you guys saw the data modeling and the book by Inman and Francesco Pupini. Any of you guys seen some of that work? And they've introduced something called the unified star schema. That is very helpful to have a look at and to teach and to show the people how to do it. So when we did our value proposition, we used the normal business strategy. And what our core message here was to say, could we remove all of the cost elements of a data lifecycle? And when I refer to the data lifecycle, this is the typical one that you see in the DMBOK, where it goes plan, and that's where all your data architects are. Then you go into design enable, that's where your data modelers are. Then you create the data and obtain the data using data integration or just pulling it down from the web. You store the data, you use the data and enhance the data. And notice that of the 7 elements here, business only really get value of those 2, the 2 in green. So they're paying, all of these things are costs, right? Planning doesn't help them get to insight. The architecture stuff, the design, the modeling doesn't help them to give the insights. It's part of it and it's necessary, but it doesn't give them the value that they require. So these things are pretty much wasted activities, and certainly the dispose of, it's critical in terms of not getting caught with your data privacy, but does it add any value to the insights? And the answer is typically not. So why are these data scientists and that doing that? And they're typically not geared for this type of data management. So we need to do something about it. So this is the recipe we put together. Any of you guys seen any of this? Where we go from, Mark, I see you, thumbs up. Have you seen the transformations?
No,
So,
I haven't. I like it. I love the picture. I haven't seen it. No.
So the messy stuff, and I had a really nice engagement with the weather department. I had to download all of the regional weather, the rainfalls and temperatures. And they compressed their data in such a way that when I transformed this into a narrow unified dimensional model, the documents in Power BI, they went up by an order of magnitude of 300-400 times. So we were looking at a Power BI and an Excel data set that was sitting in the region of 14 million rows that had come from 250,000 rows. So they package this data in what we seem to be as a very messy format. But so, for example, in your columns, they've almost got 3 different attributes within one column heading. So it would be like the elevation, it would be the country, and it would be the month. And so there are all these sort of levels in the column, which, of course, when we look at this from the ability to bring out all of those dimensions that you need to build a time series on, that's a mess. But it's phenomenal in terms of the level of compression they got when they used these fancy techniques. So then it was easy to download the Excel spreadsheet, 250,000 rows. They had some of the weather stations. I think the oldest one is in Belgium, and it was in the 1800s where they've been recording the weather since the 1800s. So, and they record it basically once a month for every year across their different elements. And so the data was was quite impressive. And when you unpacked it, I got to the point when I used narrow, then I couldn't fit it into Power BI. So when I unpacked and I had all the dimensions there, and it got it into this thing, Power BI couldn't, in Power Query, I couldn't complete the transformation. Okay. So this is the process that I've put together, and you can see the value of when you go from this messy to tidy. You can see at that point in time where the data quality issues are, and when you go into narrow and you're linking everything to a dimension, now you're forcing yourself to deal with the data quality issues. And the fascinating thing is that if you look in both R and Python, they actually use these terms of melting the data set, transforming it, and then tidying it up, and then going into star and things like that. So we built this process, we built this flow, and this is how we put it together. And then we sort of started teaching the statisticians and that on how to do it. And then they started to build their own data sets and their own ability to put that together. So that was quite an engagement. It was quite helpful for the people and certainly the citizens to understand the basic modeling. Okay, how to get the things into the right format. And sorry, what I didn't show there was that it's interesting that we went into the unified star schema, but then from there we had to go back into a wide data set. Okay, it was still tidy, but we had to go back to wide so that they could apply some of the goal seeking. Has anyone done goal seeking within Excel where it may have 50 columns and they're looking for an outcome and they apply the goal seeking algorithm? And if you don't have it in the nice different columns or everything in wide, then it just doesn't work. So it doesn't help when your numbers are 1, 2, 3, almost your surrogate dimension numbers within the unified dimensional modeling. Guys, are there any questions or observations on it? Paul, I know that I needed to share this with you at some stage. Everyone's quiet. Do you guys see some of the values of teaching your statistical guys how to do this type of stuff, get it into the right format for the data modeling?
Absolutely. This is this could be not a hackathon, but a workshop.
Correct.
Workshop.
And we did it on a few of them. And what was interesting is that we started. I always found it funny. I built a wide data set once, and I handed it over to a BI developer, and he said, "Let me just spend some time getting it into the proper format." He says, "Because this is a mess." So I think we as certain people, we get so stuck in our ways of doing stuff that we just keep on repeating the same thing over and over again, and we stop learning. So USS stands for Unified Star Schema. That was the new bit of work that Francesco and Inmon put together, and they deal with all of the traps. So can you see these traps? I call it fixing the data traps. They got loss of data, the fan, the chasm trap, the multi-fact, and the loops trap. So I don't know if you guys have, if you're playing in Power BI or Click and you bring in two fact tables and they make use of the same dimensions, and then in some cases you have these circular loops and stuff like that, and you get into all sorts of challenges with the self-service analytical tool. Whereas the USS, when you put the design together, it gets rid of all of that. And if you're interested, I'll show you a quick example. Whilst I'm getting this example, is there anything else any other questions or observations of that?
There's a lot to unpack if you actually read all the white boxes.
Yeah. And so you actually need to spend some time and help them on some of their big challenges, and watch them see the value of moving from each step. And I also found that it's the language that I was missing. So when they put it together, they talk about observations, variables, and types. Okay, so they weren't talking about dimensions and facts and stuff like that. They didn't even know what I was talking about. But they understand in terms of doing the time series, what is the observation, what are the statistical variables that we're working with, and the types of analysis or the table types that they were interested in. So again, one has to relearn the language that we're talking about. And remember, that was in part of that community of practice where we spoke about getting a common meaning and getting a common language.
Yeah, the Hakan Einvolson from Sweden had a good talk on that at EEW, speaking in the language of your client and not in what you've learned to speak.
Yeah, don't speak to statisticians and econometricians and sometimes data scientists and not use the word observations and variables and stuff like that, because that's the language they live in. So here's an example of the USS star table. You can see here that down the bottom I've got my two fact tables. So these are financials and SEN, and this USS table links to all of these different dimensions. And now when I have, so these are my conform dimensions that link to all of these fact tables. So I can just keep on adding fact tables and not have to have the extra links to the dimensions. Can you see the value of that? Do you see, notice there that the fact tables are growing underneath? The USS table is what they refer to as a bridge table, and it bridges between the fact tables and the dimension tables. And I don't have to have a link from every single dimension table, every single fact table to every single dimension.
Right.
Okay. So nice to teach the guys. Nice to, Johan, I see Johan van der Merwe here. Are you applying that with some of the stuff that you're doing?
Well, for me at this point in time, it's a fight to get the guys to understand data management. So try to bring in these concepts is kind of a nightmare. So yeah. Yeah,
it is interesting. We are looking at, we've actually got another problem that's coming about now where they're trying to get some results to analyze the results across multiple reporting entities that they collect the data. Because they didn't specify the data properly in the layouts to the customers, they've got it in all different formats. And now it's about how do we get it together and we consolidate those formats. So, but that's something that we're working on now. Okay. So that was that very informal approach that we've taken. The next one that we've got that we started building was the data privacy community project. This one's quite a bit more formal, and it's working across multiple organizations. And we're coming together to just say, when we put a data privacy or data risk model together, what is the meta model to standardize this reporting? So for example, what does a data asset look like? What is the definition of a data dictionary, a business activity, and data lineage? And then what we've got on the right-hand side is all the knowledge areas that are involved in producing the deliverables that are important for data privacy. And so we're working together in teams to build these models. We had a presentation on it was it yesterday? That's right, Paul. And then just trying to encourage people to get involved and to contribute their understanding of and to apply in these different areas, because the idea is that we would deliver a single data model to the community, and of course it's regional, and that will allow them to do some breach reporting, impact assessment reporting, and standardizing on their data asset catalog. So this was just a group of people that got together and we're trying to standardize and understand the data that's involved. We refer to this as our meta model of all the data that we need to bring in. And this is a process that's currently underway. We had quite a long session yesterday. And what we've done then is to say, okay, I need this involvement. We need data modelers. We need a privacy SME. We need someone that's skilled in ontology. And we got data governance and a data modeler person. So those were the sort of roles that we said. Now, at this stage, I think we've got 4 data modelers. We've got 1 privacy SME. I'm comfortable with handling the data governance side, but it takes some time to put all this stuff together. There we see our multifaceted taxonomy that we've prepared as well. Okay, so that's a challenge. I think, fortunately, I don't know how you guys are doing in Canada. I know that your data privacy laws are pretty strict, but it's probably not as much of an issue right now. You guys have gone through it, and you've already established, whereas we only coming up in January, June and July, only then do we have to, or will the regulators start stepping in. So the panic is now almost like a year and a half ago with the GDPR. So we're busy facing that right now. So it's actually a really nice project to get together within a regional area to deal with some of these concepts. Now, it's amazing how much you learn when you put this together, how you learn to define an ontology and a taxonomy. And typically you won't find that within your organization, or for you, Mark, where you're a consultant, you're a contractor, and you have to do what they need you to do.
Right.
Doing the other stuff is not really that helpful. So Benzi, I see.
They need all that other stuff, but they're not willing to pay for it right now.
Yeah.
It's very much see a bear, shoot a bear.
Yeah. So you're right. So how do we get experience of doing ontology work, designing an ontology, designing a taxonomy, if we're constantly contracting and we're not getting that experience, or the organization's not doing it? We've got to look elsewhere to pick up this idea. Yeah, Benzi, if you need some help in terms of the USS, can you see the value of that?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, Howard, I can see some benefit of it. What I've previously experienced is really monster tables.
Yes.
Like really big tables, and I'm thinking it can be really useful to create this schema without going through the integration layer of the warehouse.
Yes.
So hence, I really think it will be so useful to apply it, especially to show the business value earlier without having to traverse through certain layers of modeling.
Yes. And the other thing that I found really easy was when you have that bridge table, then building a wide data set view on top of the bridge is really easy, because you don't have any join issues, and you can basically pick up every single attribute of every single dimension and relate it to the fact table. And then the values to the fact table. So it's so simple to join and create a consolidated view when you have a table like that. Okay.
100%.
All right, so the last one that I put together this is for a specific company, and we define, we've got a template, what we refer to as a knowledge area practice. So when we have to go and define all the rules for metadata, we apply the same template. We have to define all the definitions that are important to us in terms of metadata, master data, whichever one it is. We define how we're going to enforce the business alignment. And then we go through our principles, policies, procedures. We look at defining a practice scorecard. Okay. And this is something that it's actually quite challenging. How am I going to score that you've built a data model in the correct way? And specifically, if you haven't done something like the Steve Hoberman data modeling course with a data modeling scorecard, how would you measure a data model in an objective way and everybody is able to work to that scorecard? And we need to do this for data quality. So if I put a data quality expectation down as a data citizen that I expect of an asset, how would I score that they've done a good job on the data quality expectation? If you haven't defined how you're going to validate that this is producing the right value. And then, as you can see, we've got people, we've got the participants, we've got technology that we have to talk about. What is the reference architecture for data quality? And especially if you haven't bought technology for the entire organization and you have federated departments, each department can choose the data quality technology that they may want to implement. Now you've got to get consistency across all of that. So the best way to do it is have a reference architecture that says, these are our core capabilities of a data quality tool, and then allow them to make that decision based on those principles. And there we can see the metrics in terms of how we're going to measure it, and then the governance. And we also go about defining all of the processes across the life cycle. But then this is engaged with the data citizens in terms of them giving us feedback in terms of what's it like in terms of setting up the metadata to classify, catalog, and to provide a data lineage. So they get involved in defining those processes for us, for their department. And we work with them to then solidify and improve the policy definitions. Okay. And then once again, there's another one that we put together in terms of the data privacy, showing them all the interrelationships between the different policies and the type of elements that they need to deal with from a policy point of view. So you can see here that we need to understand the relationships. So if I put a privacy policy together, I need to talk about the classification of data, the cataloging of data, the data dictionary, the taxonomy. I've got a few things. I've got to look at the data security protection. I've got to look at the risk management. So there's quite a few, and then I've got to bring the data flow from the data architecture together. So I've got to be able to link all of these policies together, and we need to be able to say, if I have a metadata classification policy, that relates to the ISO policy. Okay, so how do I ensure that we're following international standards if I'm not linking all of this stuff up for them? So when they go and read the policy document, can they see all the related policies that they need to be aware of to implement the work that we're asking them to do? Now, a lot of the times when I started with this work, I thought this must be crazy to write all these. I think I started with 50 different documents. Now, whether we take all of these documents, all of these elements, and make one document out of it, or whether we bring it into one document, the content still has to be there. And the bigger the document is, the harder it is to review the document and to change certain elements when we have certain changes around the policy definition. So just put together a way of linking all of this and bringing all of these policy frameworks together. So this is, as you can see on the scale, remember that scale that we presented in terms of what is the level of community of practice that you're getting involved with. You're going from very informal in terms of wrangling data to extremely formal in terms of pulling your data privacy things together. But every single one of these processes, the success of that process is dependent on the social engagement of those processes and practices. And I'm sure, and I'll end with this quote where they talk about culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
So if we're ignoring these social processes, we're putting a lot of it down, we're putting a lot of these rules and regulations down, but is anyone following them? So the only way we get the buy-in is that we get the data citizens to become part of the data practice, to work on all of these different areas, to define it better for us and make it more relevant to them within their departments and within the challenges that they are facing? How do we get them to become that community? And I know Paul Grobler is here in terms of building a similar thing with the business glossary. Those are also things that we do all these definitions, and if we don't have any collaboration around a business glossary, that thing will die.
That's true.
Are there any comments, any questions? So Lex, you asked why a model of practice. What we do is, especially in data governance, when I want to uplift the maturity, let's say you do a data maturity assessment. I don't know if you've ever done one of those.
Yes, CMMI.
And you'll do it across all of the different areas like data quality, metadata, reference data, master data. And so the only way that we start getting to these levels 3, 4, and 5 is when they're defined. So we can only start saying we've got to a defined level when we've got a model of the practice defined. And if we don't get that model of practice defined and we don't get people embedding it and using it and measuring themselves in terms of how effective they are, then we stick at a level 1, 1.82, and we really battle to get to level 3 and over the hill into further value on the maturity assessment. Any other questions? Observations, Christine, anything from your side? It's very quiet today. Have I lost? It seems like I've lost everybody. Is that?
Nope.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello.
we can hear you, Christina.
Howard, I think from my side, sorry, I think there's a delay. From my side, what is quite evident in this is the complexity. You know, on face value, it just looks so much more simple, but as you've gone into the detail, explained the challenge, it makes me realize from a people adoption point of view, it's really multi-layered and multi-dimensional, not just from a competence point of view, you know? Yeah. So thank you for the information.
And I think it's a nice comment there, because in one of the companies that I'm working with, they've got to this reading group. So it's actually really nice to listen to some of the discussions. I know Johan has presented in one of those reading groups, but it's got to keep growing, right? So it's got to keep on adding value and getting more consistent meaning. Can you see that? That's almost where the reading group is there. So it's still quite informal. And we've got to keep moving it and getting better, where we start doing the benchmarking, the maturity assessment, and it starts helping us mature the organization. All right. Any other comments before we take a break? Is there any observations, Mark, from your side?
Yeah, it's all useful for me, Howard. You know, I'm on a mission to improve data literacy in Calgary.
Yeah.
So even this, I'd like actually a source for this diagram you've got up on the screen now. I see it's clipped at the bottom.
Yeah, okay, I'll get that. It's actually, it's the same one. It's this person here.
Okay.
The Wegner, the Wengers, and he describes what is the benefit of a community of practice when it goes very formal in terms of an organizational structure, and what is the benefit of a community of practice when it goes into informal learning. And so he talks about the different dimensions that help you structure the community of practice and grow it. Now, of course, those people that have gone heavily agile and they got the tribes and that, typically your tribes are the community of practice.
Right.
Or if they've gone to a COE, that's also there. But what sometimes we're missing is we make it so formal that the people aren't learning anymore.
Right.
So now it's become, oh, I'll just call somebody and they'll come and do the job for me. Now, does that improve the maturity within the organization, or are we just getting a few people within the COE that are the experts and we don't get the tacit knowledge coming out into explicit knowledge? We miss that side of it.
Mm-hmm.
Esti, are there any comments from your side? I know you were looking at this from an industrial engineering point of view.
I think it's very useful. Almost to what Paul is saying. So like our industrial engineering group in a company level might be, I don't want to say too small, but we might be able to almost get more from a community sense if we do it a bit broader. Like we're trying to do our little thing, and we have like a SAI, which is South African Institute for Industrial Engineering, and they're also trying to do something. So it might almost be more valuable to try and slot in with them and have, I want to say, from a company perspective, have more a social type of thing, just like let's all go drink coffee, and not necessarily the practice. Because what I found, it sounds horrible, but like there's about 15 industrial engineers, and in general in the sessions that I organize, we're about 4. So something in the setup is currently not working very well.
And I think that's part of the value. So, and it may help Esti, for example, if you can create a project that they'll work on that applies this. Now, of course, there's always a challenge in terms of have people got the time to do it. But when there's interest in terms of that project stretching them, and I must admit the privacy one for me, when it's the first time that I was able to build an ontology, that was exciting stuff. You know, it wasn't about, just do a quick Udemy course on an ontology. This was now I had to build a thing from scratch and work out what and how did I needed to compose this thing. Christine?
Yes, I just wanted to add what came out of the community of practice session. It's a complex thing, and I think it's a prerequisite for organizations, even if they're not agile, to establish communities of practice. The challenge that Esti mentioned is actually, if it's not defined well, so the community need to come up front and establish its purpose, its values, its topics, and it mustn't always sit on the leader of that team, because otherwise it's their session. It's got to be agreed topics that each because the whole thing about agile is driving accountability across the teams, and the more you involve people, the higher the level of learning, the more the engagement. So setting up a community of practice, you would also link into the structures within the organization.
Yes.
As you said, Howard, is there a center of excellence? And then also you get communities of practice with subsets. So let's say you've got data management as a community of practice. You would have a subset. Maybe the data steward community would be a subset of that. Maybe knowledge areas would be a subset. But the definition of it and establishing the cadence and the roles is quite a big thing. I mean, as a change manager, I understand what needs to go in to make it successful. It's not just saying we've got this forum and you just come in and, like Esti says, you end up having coffee and talking about, the weather, rather than topics that are topical. They need to be topical for that community as well. So the community need to identify the list and prioritize it, and then find associated speakers to do it, because then the whole environment is accountable.
Yeah, and there's a comment by Komotso on the side here that he said, just from previous experience, I found that putting a common business problem on the table and solving it through a data lens gets lots of buy-in.
Yeah,
and that's where the interest comes in. And I like that. So that idea of getting these data models to work and to help the data scientists bring the data together, there was lots of interest and value in that. And then people would change. They almost, from that point onwards, they weren't just a quick data wrangler. They actually were able to structure the data. So it's that change is important, and of course that's where Christine comes in. If you can bring this in as part of your data change management strategy, then the organization starts to get the feeling about it. But it's hard to go from zero to something without passion, without some level of business value.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Okay.
And almost to get those people in the organization that would need to make that call. So it doesn't help. We work on like a organization relevant topic, but the person responsible in the organization for implementing it hasn't been a part of it. Then they're also going to be like, nope, not going to go for that.
Well, Esty, I think that's you actually, sometimes we find, for example, that we don't have a data leader, right? And so you're not going to be able to bang the drum and say, please fund a data management workshop. They say, well, why? And I think that's where you have to find a common business problem and to be able to demonstrate that you've provided value.
Yeah.
So it is finding that thing that everybody's battling with, and how do we produce value? How do we show the organization that that we can't do that? And I like this idea of the federated data governance, because when I go down into a department and I look at the Excel spreadsheets and I look at the data quality issues, and we start fixing the problems that they have that's causing people to come in at 4 o'clock in the morning, all of a sudden the buy-in and the value is there. Now, if you try to do this at a top level where you just said, we're going to now, implement data quality, you'll find that your business people will kick against it, because it's just another issue that they have to deal with. And there's nothing better than sitting with a data citizen, as we refer to it, and say they're looking at their spreadsheets, and then we pick up data quality issues, and they're aware of it because the numbers don't balance. And you say, but you know what, if you do this, this, and this, and you structure your Power BI like this, you can fix all these problems. Now all of a sudden the lights come on and say, I get it. I get why. And then there's almost this desire not to go back into that Excel spreadsheet world again. Because that Excel hell is a real thing, but they have to do it because they don't know of a better way of doing it. Excellent. Guys, thank you very much. Paul, over to you.
Thanks very much, Howard. Very insightful once again. I was going to ask a question around something on a slightly different in terms of community, the study group.
Yeah.
And just noticing that, yes, although the study group isn't something specific to a subject area in particular or a pain point within the data management framework, but obviously the overall, because it's CDMP fundamentals, I'm just finding the engagement in the study group quite interesting, how many are contributing to the discussions. One person will ask, how does this work? Because he's a lawyer and he works in a risk environment.
Right.
And a data modeler will respond and say, well, this is how you'd fix that over here or whatever. And just finding that interaction really useful. And I'm just hearing, I can't really see them all, but I'm hearing the lights come on in so many different ways through the study group, a simple forum like study group. Yeah. And I know the objective there is to pass the exam, the main objective, but the level of learning is just encouraging as well. So
yeah, and I know Mark is doing some of that. He's holding study groups in Canada, and there's another dame in Norway. They've actually created a reading group. So they read the chapters of the DM book, and they have a reading session. So they've translated it from a study group to a reading session, and there's one person who would take a chapter on at a time, very much like you're doing, Paul.
Yes.
And then they have, it's just a lunchtime. It's almost like a brown bag session that Christine loves setting up. And you just talk about the challenges around master data. You'll give a brief introduction, for example, the context diagram, and then there will be discussions around how valuable and the type of issues that it can address.
No, 100%. So it's really proving valuable. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks again, Howard. Thanks everybody for joining. It's been excellent. Thanks for everybody's contributions, and look forward to seeing you all next week again. Same time, same place. And perhaps for Mark, not minus 32 degrees.
That'll be nice by then. Absolutely.
Thank
And
you.
This is
Thank
this
you,
is perfect for
everybody.
me because it's outside my working hours. So
Okay. Fantastic.
yeah,
Mark,
so
thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Please.
Cheers, everybody.
thank you.
Thank you so much.